Tüm satranç severlere merhabalar. Bugün çok özel bir konuğum var. Türk Milli Takımı antrenörü Büyükusta Evgeny Romanov. Onunla İngilizce yapacağız bu yayını. Hem biraz kendisinden bahsedeceğiz hem de Türkiye Şampiyonası'nın ilk tur oyunlarını analiz edeceğiz sizler için. Altyazı da ekliyorum. Altyazılarınızı açarak bu hoş sohbeti takip edebilirsiniz. So, Evgeny, we continue in English. Welcome. Thank you very much. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and what brings you to Turkey?
Good evening. Nice to see you, Selim, again. Nice to be here in Istanbul. I just decided to spend my winter time in Turkey in better conditions than in other parts of the world.
Good choice.
Yeah, it's uncomparable weather type compared to Norway, where I spent last month, or to Russia.
How is it minus?
It's still not minus, but it will come soon. So, and I try to catch a bit better weather, and of course I also continue my chess work around, and I'm here to follow the Turkish National Championship as well.
So, okay, let's talk about yourself. You are Grandmaster, obviously. Your recent rating is...
I have no idea.
You have no idea. It used to be 2580 something or more.
I still hope it's a bit better, but it's not more important. We can say my highest official rating when I was playing a lot was 2662.
Wow, that's too high, yeah, too great.
Yeah, and the live rating back in that time was even higher than this one. But, it doesn't matter because basically at the moment I introduce myself and I feel myself more as the coach.
Yeah.
So.
And tell us about your professional coaching career, because as far as I know, you have a close connection with the Norway team and a little bit of Magnus Carlsen as well. You don't want to reveal too much about it, maybe, but as much as you want to share with our audience.
Yeah, you know, I'm used for such questions all the time.
Yes.
I started my coaching career actually a very, very long time ago, more than 15 years already. I would admit just some points, like remarkable points. Back in 2011, we were working with the ONGC, Oil National Gas Corporation team in India, together with Krishnan Sashikiryan, Hampi Kanero, Dasney Lotpal, Vidit Santosh, very young Vidit Santosh. Yeah. So I worked with several national teams. I was the chief coach of Norwegian national team back in Olympiad 2014 in Tromsø. I was the national German team coach back in Olympiad in Baku 2016, and on Olympiad 2018 I won the bronze medal with the Georgian female team.
My favorite team, by the way.
Thanks.
No,
thanks
I'm
a lot.
not kidding. They play in Turkish league a lot. I know all of them in person, and I really want them to win sometime. I mean, one year I want them to win.
Believe me, one day is coming. So they're all very nice and they're professional. Let's hope a part of luck will be on their side. So all in all, if we talk together about me. I work here and there with the many national teams, with many grandmasters. I have private students. Yeah, and I work currently since last year. We started the preparation with the Turkish national team for the postponed Olympiad, which had to take place before the pandemic started.
Too sad, don't remember.
Yeah,
don't make me remember. I wanted to go there so bad as a journalist.
Yeah, but I believe, Selim, we meet there next year. Let's hope about. Yeah, concerning the question about Magnus, I say like we were in the same team. I was coaching Norwegian national team on Olympiad. We've been seated like me and you, very close. And we see each other many times, but I'm not in the position to call myself as the coach of the world champion. It's too much, but you know, time to time, like we touched same pieces, so it's better to say it in such way. And Currently, we have a good relationship, and we are touching same football.
Yes, also he's a big football fan, and you play together a lot.
Yeah, he's very competitive, and the same as me, and we are fighting. Last time I think it was like 2 weeks ago. So yeah, we like football, and we play a lot.
Who get the better of whom?
I'm on defensive side. I'm either as the keeper or as the defender, even the libero.
And he's the forward guy.
Yeah, he's a striker.
Yeah, he's a striker.
Yeah.
And in Turkey, your plans are just for, you must be here for other professional reasons. I mean, will you continue taking students, or it's just your, winter time?
It goes all together. So I'll be here on my professional side. So I think we will continue with the guys with the Turkish national team. Perhaps we will have some work, and beside that, in case I have a spare time, some free time, I can take some other students. So it goes in such a way, and of course, winter is winter.
Yeah, how can they reach you? I mean, do they reach you by TCF or by your social media, or how can Turkish students can find you?
Actually, you can sign on me up on Instagram.
Yes,
I have an opened profile there.
Okay, I can put it down in the link of this video.
Yeah, I'm not the fan of all the social networks, so I'm not often there. But basically, yes, Instagram, and actually there are plenty of websites with my email. So it's
just
possible
for
to reach
professional interested Turkish students, or some parents, maybe they are willing to try, just in case.
If they are used for Russian style. This is what we usually say. Because
how is Russian style? Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Very tough. It's I tell you the story.
Yes.
That Magnus worked with Kasparov a lot. And actually at some point maybe they even stopped the work because Gary was on a very tough side. He was pressing.
Yeah.
So, and the Norwegians, they're more relaxed.
Yeah, I can tell.
So, of course, I can't compare myself to Gary, but partly I feel the same. I'm a very tough in approach, and actually we are forcing our students. You have to do this, you have to do that. So, and we are strict in a way.
Yeah.
So, I call the Russian school is very strict school.
I know, I taken lessons from late Evgeny Vasikov when I was 14, and he was calling everybody like, you are dumb, you are arrogant, you don't know openings. If I play Simul, I will beat you 28-0.
I'm not like that. I'm not like that.
He really grew. Kıvanç is also a great student of Vasikov, and he really did great for many of us. I mean, we were crying, but we were also trying very hard to impress him. And once I remember I had beaten a Turkish guy. I was very happy, and he didn't even analyze my game because it was international tournament. He said, go beat some, foreign player, and then I analyzed. It's not worth even analyzing. And the next day I beat like 2100 Russian player. I even remember his name. It was Ayvar Ziyazetdinov. I don't know if he still plays, but it was a big achievement for a 14-year-old. So he really motivated me. I mean, whether he did it intentionally or it's just his style, but I admire this Russian school, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah, it's not for everybody, but I think we can definitely force our students to work in a hard way. So we never promise any relaxed things.
Yeah. it's not a travel camp, huh? It's not a luxurious camp. Yeah, I can tell. So let's come to the Turkish Championship. What about your thoughts on the list, on the play of we will analyze the first round today. The second round has just finished. Maybe we also get to that. But as the lineup and your thoughts on the national team as a whole from your camps.
Yeah. So first of all, I think all the chess players and all the spectators have to feel a bit sorry that 3 grandmasters are not participating. I would really see
Dragan, Emre, and
actually 4, and Ali Marandi.
Oh yeah,
but we sent regards to US at the same time.
It's too long way to travel.
Actually 4. But beside that, of course, we have the clear favorite in the list. But the favorite has been struggling already yesterday. And
you mean Wahab, right?
Yeah,
Just
I mean,
to make clear,
I mean Wahab. He deserves, of course, in this list to be the favorite, but it also means that a lot of pressure is on his shoulders at the moment, and he has somehow to cope with that. And it's not easy because other players are pretty strong, and also as far as we see, Kivanch is playing an enormous chess.
Fantastic so far.
In the first 2 rounds, especially in the first round. And I know my teammate Melih is pretty strong, so I think it will not be like an easy walk. Especially we know that Wahab is time to time pretty unstable.
Yes.
So everything depends on how the tournament will go for them. So I think he's, after surviving yesterday, he's still clear favorite. However, Katya, it's a very good field for her because she's strong enough and extremely experienced enough for such a tournament.
Must be most experienced player by far if you look at the list.
Kivanch, maybe?
Yes, but Katya also participated on a lot of big opens and stuff.
Kivanch
and Katya, they are head to head probably.
Yeah, that's true. And she's extremely well educated chess player, and she knows how to keep the pressure long, and I'm pretty sure that she would recover after such a blunder happens.
Yeah, today. Maybe we don't get to show that today, but we can jump to the games. Let's start with the main game. So I have the control, but you just stop me whenever you like. So maybe I will ask just a few questions. First is Wahab's decision of this line. Do you have anything to say about this line? Became popular or
not popular recently? I would send my remarks back to Magnus style because it's coming. Very similar structures are coming from Berlin stuff, and with bishop c5, bishop c5, bishop d6, Berlin lines. But here this structure is brings kind of long-term advantage for the white side, but also pair of bishop is on the black side. So I think all depends on the black's knight. In case we will see in the game, in case the knight from f6 will be replaced to d4 somehow, or at least to e6, usually black keeps the control, and the white's space advantage is not so important in a way of the full control of the center. But white has to organize something in the center, or
exchange one pair of bishops.
Almost impossible. But
impossible.
But perhaps or to change one pair of bishops, or to push f4 or d4. In the recent time, we know that some d4 lines in Berlin opening are common. Here Wahab was playing for f4 stuff, so let's go some moves
Knight
forward.
d7 is the critical move as far as I know, as an e5 player. And
I think that this one was still the book. This one was the preparation.
Yes.
And as far as I remember, this position is partly critical. And your notes help me that bishop f8 is the novelty.
Yes, because I think I always have the idea to put this knight on d4, either with c5, knight b8 idea, or through f8, and I don't know if it works. D6, it doesn't work here. Maybe I should spend the tempo with f6.
But it's very smart of black that they keep the pawn on f7, because there is the h4 square is under control. So just imagine, in case black would play normally like f6,
Knight h4,
then knight might come.
I lost Yılmaz Yerli like this one game, Mert Yılmaz Yerli, and how I lost, I just briefly, something like this happened. I stand with a bad bishop, and he put like the heavy pieces on e4 square, and he slowly outplayed me. Not like this exact position, but structurally I lost, and he wasn't even.
And it's it's very easy to play with white there, because it's like pawns are rolling, g4, h4, g5. So. I think bishop f6 is more common way, because with playing bishop f8, black loses part of the control over d4 square. By playing bishop f6, there is knight f8, knight e6. But I like bishop f8 move. It's pretty same. However, I suppose one move is very important, even with bishop on e7, one move ago. There is the very critical point. Black has the bishop on c8, and they gonna organize the play on the light squares.
Yes.
For the play on the light squares, they have to modify their pawn structure. So I would say, in case white is in time to play a5,
yes,
that would really bring kind of strategical advantage, because potentially they would keep the control over c5 square, b4 squares. They will try to keep control over dark squares generally.
So black has to respond immediately.
I would say if there is a chance to put the pawn on a5, I would bet on this move.
Do it like immediately, you say. And then b6, c5, something like this.
Not sure about c5
because it will kill the bishop.
Yeah, not sure about c5, but b6 maybe, and then we will see where the bishop goes on. So maybe on b7 or potentially on e6, or like we often say in Rui Lopez in Russia, the bishop on c1 is already developed. So it's same like here, bishop on c8 is already developed. Maybe bishop is not the best piece to move.
I see.
So there is something else to be replaced.
So okay, I think knight d2, knight c4 idea is like what you should do.
I also think that knight c4 is very big mistake for white.
So you say like he must play f4 now.
The point that black would replace the knight via c5 to e6 to d4 to control the center, and white definitely requires to keep the d4 square under control. If knight goes to c4 and attacking e5 square, you should never combine knight c4 and f4 together.
Okay, good idea.
So if you're playing f4, can you please make it? E takes f4, rook takes
rook
takes f4, knight e6, rook f2. This is what I feel. And potentially the knight might be like traded via knight f3.
Back. Good point. So if you want to put your knight on c4, you want to pressurize the pawn, not exchange it.
Exactly. So if you're going for knight c4, I would say knight c4, it's good to be combined with a5 move. Just keep some time not playing f4. Maybe a5, maybe bishop e6, b3, h3, some extra moves, knight e2, and then f4, e takes f4, knight f4, just to stabilize the position a bit and to keep the knight on c4. However, Wahab mixed it up. It's not easy, I would say. This position is very tricky because it looks like he makes the normal moves. He just
just verse after like 50 moves or so.
Pair of bishop. No, we have to remember Kasparov. He even said once like anyway, worse bishop is better than good knight. Exactly.
We continue this. So this combine knight c4 f4 combination is not the ideal, you say, and I have to agree because the game continuation.
Also, I'm not sorry. I'm not sure about bishop g3.
You want to retreat back?
I want. It's doing nothing on g3 basically, because bishop has to control dark squares, and it's not attacking c7. It has to control d4 or c5, and just to again, what I feel from the white side, I feel to stabilize because potentially I don't like my position.
Not anymore. I think what Wahab had in mind when he played this knight d2, knight c4, knight e3, he wanted to go to f5 so bad that he didn't care about opponent's moves. He just like, okay, I'm going to f5.
He just wanted to smash.
Yes,
as usual.
Yes, as usual. Typical
as usual.
You know, I call him magician because whatever he does, he manages a way out. He did wrong or right. He manages, I mean, locally, I mean, not internationally maybe, but even internationally he does it sometimes,
Yeah, you know that I had an experience to work with a hub on training camps, and one thing I always say, it's very good to be a magician, but from good positions, you know? It's much better from having a good position first.
So the game, and we have a very nice tactic coming up, missed by both players. A5. Okay, this might be correct strategically, right?
I'm not sure anymore because he just creates the weakness on a5 for himself.
He can be collected sometimes.
And knight already went from c4 away. Pawn is not guarded, and black is definitely not playing for b6, a5 anymore. So a5 is just an extra weakness, and now Katya is going to centralize all the pieces. Goes to d8, maybe bishop to b4, bishop to c5. So white has to be very accurate. White is step away from being worse, seriously worse.
I think Wahab did not realize that his position was becoming critical here. He had like, and now comes the big mistake. I want to ask you about this because I missed a similar tactic in my game recently with Ataberk. Counterintuitive moves like, you know, this dragon bishop, sometimes you take it on d5 and there are traps like you win the piece back, but you don't check the possibility of giving your fianchetto bishop to a knight. Here it's the same, like you have a super knight and both players missing this tactic. How would you explain this at this level?
This actually very easy to explain, because queen h5 move is coming from overestimation. Wahab is clearly playing for win. He thinks like, I have the pawn on e4, I have light squares, my knight is centralized, potentially I will play queen h5, king h1, knight f5, I will deliver the knight from c3. Actually the main problem of white at the moment is the knight on c3, no single square on board,
no single squares.
So absolutely cut. And of course queen h5 is just preparative move to deliver the rook a1 to get other pieces in center. So Wahab is playing for win and he thinks he's better, and when you clearly have the feeling you're better,
you don't care about your background. And what about black, Katya? Let's show the tactic first. After this move you must take, obviously, because it's a double attack. And now the unfortunate queen is trapped by his own pawn. He cannot use this square.
Queen h4
and probably g5, and black wins. So I mean, it's a bit shocking, but at the same time it's understandable, because it happens to even the best players. They don't seem to spot these opportunities even when they have like enough time in the beginning of the game. And black has a good position. She doesn't think like, oh, I'm winning in one move, I already have great position, why not play like here and already, or rook e5 as in the game later. She kicked the bishop out, I think, somehow.
I mean, if you are talking from the black side in this moment, you have to ask yourself, what did white make wrong? So that's very usual. When you're from the black side, you can't believe that white made something wrong to be lost.
I wouldn't.
I mean, I would believe here, like, slightly better for black. There is
I would say the same.
Just something kind of centralized, light squares, and I have some play, maybe bishop f7, then bishop c5, then centralizing the rooks. But what was wrong? Basically nothing.
It seems like,
Therefore, this is the random chance. We call it as the random chance, and I can't explain this chance from my personal system or from general approach. It just happened because queen is there, rook is there, pieces are not not in a fist, not communicated.
I mean, if this pawn was on a4, this tactic would not have just worked. Then it could have escaped to a5 square. Maybe then it's trapped again there. Maybe it's even there, it's trapped.
I think it's trapped anyway.
Okay, then it has nothing to do with this pawn. It's trapped anyway. Well,
but generally, just imagine one extra move h3 instead of queen h5, and this tactic doesn't work.
You're correct.
I just feel nothing bad been done. Before both players missed. Wahab been definitely overestimating the position, and Katya just
has already a good position. Is not looking.
She did not feel that such a good position might be already won.
Okay,
but
understandable.
Understandable, but
already a concession, like repeating the position. Like
but I believe Wahab clearly realized. I'm at the same time, I'm pretty sure that after bishop e6, queen h5 would not happen.
Exactly.
So he will definitely change the plan and
Katya
continue
is a principled player. He has a good position. She plays for principled way, and I think this is also a good move, putting pressure on this diagonal and activating this bishop. King. This idea I saw it first time in such a structure. Did you ever see this rook lift? Like
I believe it's about the pawn on a5.
Really?
Yeah, it's not about mating. There is nothing to mate.
She wants to take the pawn.
She prepares to play bishop b4 and to grab the on a5. she simply develops the rook, and rook is consolidated. There are no squares for other pieces. And clearly she's not going to mate. Maybe she will provoke some weakness here and there, but rook is nicely placed, and it's an active move. And white has to be very accurate already.
Already has bad position, and okay. Rook g5. You see, she's trying to provoke something here, and Waf actually falling for it because he's not satisfied with passive defense or equality. He wants to still crush, as you say.
Yeah, this
is again here. For instance, bishop b4 is like winning a pawn.
I think bishop b4 is winning the pawn. About this position, white has to be very accurate and to find the balance how to defend.
Yeah,
they need to trade the pieces. For example, knight e2. I would really like to play, but unfortunately, bishop h5. So Wahab also wants to play knight e2.
Yeah.
However, impossible. Therefore, he's preparing to play knight e2 by playing queen e1.
But then c2 pawn.
Yeah, but then bishop b4 other pin.
Yes. Yeah, it's really opening catastrophe, some kind of, because he was definitely dreaming of strategically good endgame, like good bishop against bad bishop or strong knight against bad bishop.
Or pressure or long-term play, and instead he has somehow to cooperate. But it's not the opening catastrophe, I would say. He simply missed several tempos, and he missed the key line of the way of playing in this position. So overestimation fault him for a slightly worse position, and he had to defend. And
now I think it's getting worse with this decision, but maybe practically it's understandable because he feels he needs to do something. He's not the type of player just to sit and passively defend. Instead, he goes for an assault on the king side, which will backfire, as we will see. But I think Black is playing this phase of the game perfectly fine. He needs to defend. And, this is also a good move. All moves are probably up to some point are approved by the computer. Now h3 is met by h5, I guess, and it's
yeah, but generally already very difficult to play. I would avoid this g4 move at any point, but question is how not play by not playing it.
How
not to play g4, because Wahab wants to get the knight on f5, and he's still playing for a win.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the problem.
Yeah, so he wants to push, but he's not ready for that, and he's simply making the weaknesses. It's a kind of fight, the inner character versus the position.
Yes, but I think he's doing against the wrong player. I mean, if you would have done it someone much weaker than him, it would have worked, and it worked. I know it by experience, and I've seen it a lot. But here Black is playing like.
But Katerina is always confident.
Yes, and even here, like this bishop retreat is the correct square, the active one. And for instance, computer suggests just retreating the knight back and staying passive and hoping for not dying immediately. But of course, it's not for human. Now comes b4 and knight e6. What about this?
No, just in general, Black is preparing the move of c5. But if we stop at this point, I would say like let's make the evaluation.
Yeah.
Or as Kramnik says, assessment.
Assessment.
Yeah. So if we compare the king safeties, it's in Black's favor.
Exactly.
Pieces coordination. Look, knight on a4, bishop on h4, rook on c1. It's like nothing in a fist. And Black is very centralized.
Yes.
So pieces coordination is in Black's favor. And strategically, however, post structure is still in White's favor.
Correct.
And space is in White's favor. So I would say if I take the plan here, from the Black side, I would play very dynamic chess. I will try to search for some kind of the pushing style moves. And from the White side, I would be very accurate. I would start controlling the position. I will try.
Yeah.
Impossible. I will try. I will try. However, I don't like knight a6 move. But what is the first idea here? Just crushing. I think our followers can check it with engine afterwards.
Yeah, for sure.
But my bet is knight c2. I believe knight takes c2 has to work. This is the critical point anyway.
Wow, this knight c2 might be missed second time, but this one is much tougher. So what's the idea? I have to take with the rook or what?
Rook or bishop, you can try both. So
okay, let's try with the rook first. You take
queen takes d3.
Okay, it's attack here and
and attacking e4 square. So I think I will grab the point that I will grab the pawn on e4, and then I will manage to put the bishop on d5, and this diagonal like just come.
So what if I take with the knight?
Same, pawn is pawn, you know.
Ah, you just want to kill on the light squares like
this. I play rook e4 and bishop d5.
Oh, okay. This is.
Yeah. Also, it's on hanging on g4, sacrifice. Hanging on
already
e4.
Having a good position. This is a tough sacrifice.
I just would feel from the black side here that almost winning. It's already. I entered all my pieces. My rooks are in center. Queen is centralized. All together,
it's time, man.
It's time.
Yeah.
So usually
knight c2 missed for the second time, and he managed to put the knight on f5, but he sacrificed that.
He was hoping.
He was hoping for this trick, like she cannot take, obviously, but bishop g6, and now tactically black is winning.
Yeah, because by playing knight f5 and opening the position up, Wahab simply helped Katya and opened the bishop, light squared bishop, and opened the center. And
very good tactic is like if you take here, hoping for this, like even this doesn't work, but there is intermediate move. Now it's kind of forced. You have to retreat.
Yeah, take on f5,
take
rook f5, rook g1.
And now this must be technically either winning or very good, let's put it this way.
Yeah, and one thing to say after the next move, after rook bishop f6.
Yes.
Here again, you see there is no coordination in white's pieces. Bishop f6 is the hope, like entering bishop, then I retreat the knight from a4, then I will play e5, and maybe I will consolidate on dark squares.
And win! At this point, you think he's still playing for a win? I will bet he is still.
No, I don't think he's thinking about result anymore. he just makes the moves, and we make a little fun of Wahab. But beside that, he has an amazing fighting character.
I will appreciate him until towards the end of the game, because he fully deserved it. Like having almost lost position all game.
He's fighting very strong, and I had an experience playing with him, so he takes all the chances in the game.
Yes, exactly.
But therefore, this is like an advice versus the top players. Like I have an experience to play and work with them, and same versus the fighting guys like Wahab. You have to kill the game immediately.
Yeah.
So, and at this point, I suppose, or here or next move rook f8, h4. Yeah, I think here is c5.
C5, I was the strongest move, but it's like it's super. I mean, yes, this is the strongest move. I checked it too, but I think a human eye would play like this. I think it's much human way to play, I would say. And what Katya did is, I think, also wins, but is just prolonging the fight.
Yeah, that's true. I just want to say that h4 sounds strange to me, because it looks like h4, h5 he wants to mate, and I believe white has been in hilarious time troubles already. But after h4, you see there is queen h3 mate all the time.
Yeah, if queen can reach the square.
Therefore, I just need to clean that diagonal somehow. And also the knight on a4 is under the threat.
Yeah.
Therefore, in case, just show the line. C5, I think it's more or less obvious for their level. Knight takes c5, otherwise it's hanging. I take back on c5. Pawn takes on c5.
And very clean.
And just...
Great. Yeah, this is the main line, which shows that c5 move would have won right away.
Yeah, but she also played, I think, extremely good.
Yeah, takes, and
just
here,
gaining the piece up.
Yeah, and it seems like game over, but Wahab, true to his style, he found this move, and now the game goes on. And
yes, some moves are very obvious, so we can proceed from them.
Now I have a question. Okay, you must eliminate this pawn, otherwise you are dead.
Yeah.
These skills. And now I have a question for you. This is my favorite question for the show. You need to set up a fortress with white. You rather have knight or bishop with your rook? Do you have an intuitional answer for this? You want to change this piece with a bishop, or of course, you know, c5, it looks great, but still. against the fight against the queen, which piece you would prefer?
From the basic things, rook and bishop coordinates much better than rook and knight. So therefore, in the beginning of Russian chess school, I would say we learned that in such a constructions you need to have rook and bishop.
Bishop, yes.
Rook and bishop. Yeah, but generally with the bishop it's easier
to control the pass pawn. Maybe you need to sacrifice
and also if bishop on c5, it's more difficult for black to organize the pass pawn as well. So in this construction I would rather prefer bishop, but bishop has been changed on c6 long time ago, and before we have the knight.
So this is a very long end game. I want to skip a little bit fast. Obviously black is winning here with b6 idea, just creating a pass pawn. Yeah, and
even what she did, she played very well until the last moment.
Okay, let's jump very quick. I think
I would say just one moment for like 10 seconds.
Sure.
I have to like to save the Katya's honor in this way, in the way of the end game.
She made one mistake.
She played extremely well, but it's not as easy as it looks when you're following with engine, because all the time white has normal structure, and in case you're missing the a pawn, it's fortress. And all the time you have to think and to control all these fortress things. So by hand it's possible, but kind of tough way. So therefore it's nothing to blame. I can imagine how disappointed she was yesterday evening, clearly, but it's nothing to blame herself for not winning such a position. Many players did not win, and many will not win
in the future.
In the future. It's not as easy as it looks. I especially talk to our spectators because they think chess bomb or something, chess 24, -5 or something. Just one wrong move, I control the a pawn. You can imagine rook on c4, no b7 pawn, rook on c4, knight on a4, and king there. And I will set up like 2 squares for my pieces, rook c4, knight a4, and king on that side, and it's over. It's immediately.
Well, I would say the engine is like not the best helper for such positions, because black has a queen, it always says, like, even if it's a fortress, it says like -3, and you don't understand. For instance, I had during the game I had a wondering, okay, I will just set it up. Maybe not possible to reach, but there was a move like this, like threatening perpetual check, and I was just wondering, just theoretically, let's say if I exchange this knight with the a pawn and I manage my king here, I will just, for the sake of my argument, I will try to like do this. Just I'm making up the moves, not important, like this. Just curious, no, not check, just pass one more move. I don't think it's a fortress, just curious. Is this a fortress?
No, it's not a fortress.
It's not. Why? How do you mean?
Because
king will pass through, right? Like this.
Or king might come and pawn and game might be one. No, but generally I will make couple of checks. I will come from the bottom. From here, let's say. And I will attack the pawn. I will provoke the weakness. Maybe even without checks, but in a slow manner.
You will attack from this side, right? From g3 side, you will force me to play.
Let's say, unfortunately, the pawn on c6 is hanging. So
let's defend it, because we made a lot of good moves for white. Let's for simplicity. Let's analyze this position.
And then I go, let's say, queen b1 now.
Okay, it's black's. Okay, let's do like this. You want to play b1?
Queen b1.
I go back.
Let's say I play queen g1.
G1. I have to wait like this.
Queen g3.
And
I will
already problems, huh?
And then let's say you play king c4.
No, this loses immediately.
This loses. Let's say you play king c4 in that position. Then I will play queen e3.
Can I play like this?
And then your rook has no squares, and I will play something like king d6, and this is the Zugzwang.
It's over. Here, but okay, I understand your point.
But then 100 of checks and the rook will be lost.
Okay, so this is a lost position for. If this doesn't work, if this doesn't hold, then I think there is no way to save white. And which point I jump?
Just jump
this game. Let's go to the mistake.
yeah, until even this.
The moment she took,
this is the human wise, very understandable.
Yeah,
you are in the end of the second time control. You are tired and you want to eliminate this pawn because
and you calculate this simple line and say, okay.
I don't think you even calculated that.
For the spectators.
It's just kind of inner feeling because you start seeing after 5 hours you start seeing the ghosts. Pawn is coming to e6, rook c7, e7, knight e6. Maybe the king would hide on c8 somehow.
And you lose.
Yeah, but just put the king on c8 now.
Yeah, this king goes to.
Yeah,
I need to make.
You can make the arrows.
No, like this.
Yeah, like king goes to c8, pawn goes to e6, rook c7, e7, and therefore she was running around this position for quite some moves. And simply she wanted to stop it. She wanted not to think about...
had enough.
Yeah.
What's the winning move here?
I think she... Actually, I did not check with the machine, but my feeling like or king d8 or queen b4, king d5, king d8, something like this.
But can I take the pawn or no? Knight e6 check?
Or maybe... there are no checks, right? There is no mate. Maybe a4, just simply run.
Yeah, this needs to be analyzed.
Yeah,
like this.
And we will now fall to a drawish position.
Yeah.
Maybe king d8. This what I
immediately without or here.
Yeah, here.
And what about this?
King c8. Rook c7, king b8.
I say goodbye.
And my pawn runs much faster than yours.
Because I cannot come back with the knight. The rook is
yeah. So I will gain a couple of more tempos, but it's not about that. I would say even here Wahab would create several problems for black. But it's just about the feeling. This is the humans game, finally. Even not the engines. Still, let's hope for that. Because human-wise, I would clearly feel for queen takes e5. And in blitz, I believe many players would simply grab it.
Yeah, and even in classical game, you have 2 minutes. Many people would not resist this temptation. Just protect your pawn, like that. And then it's 2 pawns, should be over. But unfortunately, white collected the a pawn, then it was a fortress, and we can finish this game, I think. And congratulate Wahab for fighting spirit.
Even it's winning somewhere. It's nothing already to blame or to discuss, because this is the time troubles. These are the last moves. And it's very tough. Even tough to not only to understand, but tough to play on the last seconds. So I would also congratulate Katya with a very good strategical game and with some dynamical part after the good development and good opening.
Yeah, model game with this setup, I think. As a e5 player, I would simply consider this. Maybe bishop f6, your suggestion is much better, but bishop f8, I will also keep it in mind.
Yeah, but generally she played a very good chess, and I think both players deserved
brilliant surprise. They have brilliant surprise this year.
Very nice.
Every 3 rounds by voting and some I think some titled players. I don't know about the rules, but every 3 rounds they are giving out 2,000 lira for a brilliancy prize. It doesn't need to be a fantastic win. Maybe this fighting game will take.
We will see. So it is some games left until the prize will be drawn.
And our second game is this game interested you, the opening phase.
Yeah. Actually, my teammate.
Yes. Mine also.
Ours.
Yes, ours.
So
I used to play bishop g5 in this position.
Maybe he has some ideas.
Is it a novelty?
I don't think so. Basically, I think bishop f4, knight d5, bishop g5 been played, and I also think that after bishop f4, knight d5 is not the main move. There are some moves like c5, bishop a6. There are some other opportunities, but here after queen a8, I already don't like the position of black. I can explain why. There is no coordination. I see queen is on e8, stops the rook. Queen is not centralized. My knight moved twice, and white has been like developing.
Yeah,
this is the dreaming position for queen c2 players regards to Alexei Dreyev. So your pieces are well developed. You control the center, everything going forward, but all in all, you're doing nice. What black has done? Knight is on d5. There is no outpost for the knight. Knight gonna be punched by the next move. And
he should have sacrificed his 7 pawn, like some typical. Was it possible? Because I think Michael Adams used to do such sacrifices and get some counterplay somehow.
Yeah, I suppose, or bishop a6 or c5. There are two moves which are
like
interesting.
This, right? I think there is a theory, if I'm not mistaken, and then you develop like Grunfeld style.
Yeah, perhaps I think there is after queen c7 also queen d5 move. Might happen. Might be also interesting.
Yeah,
with idea to jump to b3.
I don't know the theory of this.
So, there is no need. I mean, there is the huge ton of theory, and I'm not able to memorize even part of that. But let's talk. Maybe they need this opening for other teams, so let's not discuss the opening.
Yeah.
I would say about this position. Again, about the evaluation assessment. So. White has extra piece in play. They have control in the center. Black is undeveloped. Yeah,
and I'm sure by looking at the time he spent, he didn't know. But he was surprised. Black was surprised in the opening. Denis did not know this move because he was burning a lot of time here. Huge.
So when I see this position, White definitely has the dynamics. White should play very fast. White should create some play, and black is clearly weakening the king. So, what is your move?
You gave me a hint, but now I should consider taking on. No.
But you're thinking in a correct way.
Yeah, okay.
But
I mean, I want to do this, but it's going to the end game. Probably not.
Black
much.
Is fine.
Yeah, black is fine.
Black is fine.
Okay.
So, but this what we are talking about. Just make a long castle first.
Wow, long castle first, and
h takes g5 and e takes d5 now.
Yes. And when he takes, you want to take this or you want to attack?
I think we take on d5, not opening the extra files, and having in mind.
Oh no! Can I go to the end game?
Yeah, but then the pawn on g5 is hanging.
Yes, and it's extra pawn for nothing.
Yeah, and
for something else.
Yeah, continuing the attack even afterwards.
Long castle was so strong, yes.
So just this is the inner feeling of the dynamical guys. You should. I mean, bishop d2 is the retreating move.
It's normal move for most human beings, yeah.
Yeah, but this is the retreating move in a position where you have the dynamical advantage. So you should go forward, and then you're going back.
Yeah.
So for instance. After long castle, let me think. What is the move? Maybe something like maybe bishop b7 or bishop a6 for black.
Which one we should have?
Yeah, I think bishop b7 is more or less normal.
Okay.
Having an idea after e takes d5 to activate the bishop, then perhaps to grab on f3 and then only to grab on g5. Something in such way. So, but after bishop b7, I would play bishop h6.
Now the king is not on a1.
I would not go back bishop d2 again. So it's very interesting. Maybe our guys would analyze it with engine, but I suppose that approach-wise, it's very important not to go back when you can go forward.
What you say is much better, much more valuable than computer analysis, because during the play, most of the time we don't know how to think or where to look. We miss tactics, we make strategical mistakes or such conceptual mistakes like this one. I would personally also probably calculate this, and seeing it doesn't work, I would go back to d2 probably. The long castle is hard to spot really, because you don't check these moves. You say like, I have to solve this problem with my bishop is attacked.
Yeah, that's the inner feeling, maybe.
Yeah, inner feeling.
Feeling of safety. You also think I have pair of bishops, I have nice structure, and I will have slight pressure. But for me, it's a little bit different, because I give the priority for dynamical factors, and therefore I try to smash first.
Chigorin was one of your favorites, I guess, then. Many Russians see him as a,
he's the father of Russian chess school. That's for sure, and he played.
He used to play like dynamical style.
Yeah, very interesting chess. He played very interesting chess. But also I think Boris Spassky is very common. Let's call St. Petersburg players other St. Petersburg players.
True. And another interesting question: would you capture with the king or with the rook?
No, with the rook.
With the rook. So you want a long castle?
I just don't see the
point of taking
the point of taking
just
with
artificial. The king. I don't know, and just connect the rooks this way.
Yeah, but if you continue playing slowly, Black has changed all the right pieces, and they would play knight f6.
How did Black equalize this game then? I'm curious now. Here.
Yeah, I also don't like knight a5 move. I would say I want to do something. I need to do something. I would still consider long castle, bishop c3, g5, g4. The h6 pawn gives some chances. So I think after long castle, it's not so clear because of I think Milik declined it already because of queen c6.
He doesn't want to go to the endgame. So that's the problem, yes.
I think it's not the refutation of the line, but it's actually the endgame with the bishop, rook and bishop. You remember,
yes, true.
Coming back to previous game.
So I must take,
better for white.
Or no, I must not take.
Maybe rook f1, not develop the knight first.
Let him take.
Yeah, then you play bishop f4, and anyway you
must take now. Otherwise, I don't let you exchange one more time, and it's a very comfortable position, like 2-3 tempi up and.
Yeah, bishop f4, h3, g4, or maybe even bishop f4, d5. So white is pressing.
Yeah.
Instead, after knight e5, he's definitely defending, but he did not fix his king safety yet. And queens are on board, and it's very easy development. So black can do whatever they want in the center now. So they can even play c5 and maybe give this pawn.
Yeah, well, that's what it is.
Yeah.
I think in both games we saw some psychological part. White is better and he doesn't want to exchange queens, therefore he makes a dubious move.
Yeah, this is the feeling. You never know when you're playing the game. You never know how much. Yes. You know that you're better, but to wait, you have to wait. If it's enough for like technical win in the long term, or you just have to go immediately all in.
Wab once told me that if I had a chance to take computer assistance, I don't want the first line. I just want the evaluation. He has a point. Think about it. He said, like, I want to evaluation 3 times per game. If, like, we are talking about, of course, theoretical things, not that he would consider as a super guy in honesty, but if I can have the evaluation, then I would know what to look for. Not just even the move. I can find the move myself. I'm strong enough. Just give me the evaluation. Yeah, what you're saying,
truth, yeah. Same for all of us.
And this game went to, let's say, kind of boring endgame, but maybe there were chances.
I would say queen takes c5. I would never play queen takes c5.
You would keep it?
I can't play knight takes c5 because since I'm losing the piece.
Do you? Yeah, you do, right?
Yeah, after b4. But I would take with b takes c5 because
like today's structure.
Yeah. And also, I'm not sure in some previous moves of black. Maybe I would prefer to have the rook a on b8, and maybe I would just immediately take on c5 because the endgame is clear worse and coordination.
Worse for black, yeah.
Yeah, coordination with queen and knight gives me some chances because I still think there is a little problems with the white king safety, or at least it requires several tempos to run down. So after b takes c5, I would put the pawn on c4 potentially, and try to keep control. And then I replace the knight, maybe knight b6, knight a4, or knight c5 if there is a chance for knight c5. But without queens, I clearly know I have to defend like hell, worse position, without single chance to win a game.
I think black having a tough opening time, he was very content to accept this slightly worse endgame, and just, I know this feeling very, very well. And I think he thought, okay, I cannot lose this. Why would I lose this? That's what he thought, I think. Yeah. Maybe he's right.
I think he's wrong.
Yeah.
I played in my life versus such a guys who would simply dream about this
position.
I can't even name Evgeny Tomashevsky, for instance.
Oh yes, of course.
And many Anish Giri would say. many guys
they kill for this position.
Yeah, they would drink your blood until the end of the game, even if they don't win it. So it's one-sided. White's king is centralized. It's very close to black pawns.
Yeah.
You have rook and bishop coordination. You have space advantage plus very good bishop and no outposts for the knight.
Yeah, you count.
It's tough to defend.
4 negatives for black, if I counted correctly.
Yeah.
Now makes me wonder thinking about the position again. But maybe we should skip this game a bit. I just want to ask you something about the pawn end game because I really thought,
just about this moment.
Yes, I really thought white was winning here, but turned out that he's not.
Yeah, I don't like the white's play. Somewhere here. Let me think for one more second.
Yeah.
This move I like. This move I also like. I suppose that the white's goal has to come by the king or to create the weakness on b6. So I badly want to have my pawn on b5. Therefore, after b3, knight c5, I really feel to play b4, b5. Maybe at once. Just make it.
b4, and now I have to retreat where? The question.
Maybe d7.
Yeah, and now you want to fix this weakness. Yeah. Great. And I don't want to let your king penetrate, so I must push like this. Yeah, because if I let you do this, then I'll lose it, or close to losing.
Yeah, or maybe at some point. Yeah, why I'm playing b5? Because I need to prevent black from playing b5. Just that's very important to mention for our followers.
Yeah, let's make a bad move like this.
If I miss one move, then b5. This structure on the light squares is clear for black. Actually, black might start playing for
black might start playing for
therefore I need to get the space, and I need to push the pawn.
And can
bishop e3.
And now what? Like this?
Yeah.
And f4 or what? And then you start to squeeze and.
You know, I maybe I can try to get somehow. I want to get my pawn to e5, but it's not easy.
Even if that is not winning, let's have your dream position. I just play super passive.
Yeah, let me have the pawn on e5.
And then you have. Okay, I'm going to play more.
Then I put my king on e4.
Can I go like this?
Yeah, king on e4.
G4. Okay, and then it's 2 1-sided. Even if it's draw, I got the point.
Yeah, so I would h5 is important move.
Of course.
I think otherwise I would play g4, h4, h5, and then
let's have it. Even this. Okay, you let me play g6. I hope. Yeah.
Welcome.
But now this is weak. Yeah. But still, there are some chances.
I'm threatening to play f5, and after h5 I take, and then play f5. So if I will manage to organize the path for my king, it's clearly winning.
Yes.
But it's suffering. So I wanted, maybe it's impossible in the game, but my inner feeling to get some space, and at the same time to get my my king and my bishop and his weakness. Maybe
you want all at the same time.
Yeah, maybe I want too
much.
I
was wondering during game one question, this pawn end game, it went draw so fast. Now I wanted to analyze this move, because otherwise if you let black play a5, then it's dead draw as in the game, because now there is no chance.
Yeah, but we have to count the number of tempos.
Yes, that's true. Because in this position I go king b6 and I have the square under control, no chance. But when I play like this, I put both of us like mind squares or corresponding squares, as is in the theory. Now we must count.
But white has to start, right?
But I'm not risking anything.
Yeah, you're not risking. But if I play e5,
now still I'm not risking anything.
Yeah, you're not risking, but you start moving pawns. So I'm second to move. At the moment
I cannot lose. If I'm run out of moves, I just play b4 and we shake hands.
Yeah,
that's why I was surprised.
King d6, king c6. But I think it's
draw, because black has a good waiting, right? You have one extra and you are to move theoretically.
Yeah, so you like play.
No, I cannot. I mean, not you, but black. No, I don't think so. Right? It's too complicated, but it feels like it won't.
Yeah. Still, I have to even.
You have this square. Sorry.
Even if I have king d6, king c6.
Yes. Okay, it's dead draw. The guys were right. So, okay. Anything particular in this game?
No, actually there are two moments which I really wanted to admit. Maybe three, as I said about the long castle. It was in this game, right?
Yeah.
So as I said about the long castle, I also wanted to say about the changing the queens. And about this dynamical play, and of course before b5 in the end games, you have to gain some extra space.
Very introducctive, yes.
So
even
I
that
think
position is playable for a win.
Yeah, I think Melich would feel a bit sorry after this game because he was very close.
When he watches this video, maybe he didn't analyze it yet because he's still playing. And our next game is a battle between two strong grandmasters and two national players, ex-national player and the second of the national player. It was, I mean, during these days, I think you don't want to challenge Burak on an opening theory because he is like the guy who puts the most effort in theory. So Kıvanç chose some setup.
You know, we are all on the same plate now, and Burak is doing very good work.
I know.
So and he works on high level with openings and helping to other guys. So
he has a great website. I will put the link downstairs as well. He is selling professional opening preparation.
Yeah, but concerning this game, I would say I would admit this point. First of all, okay, d takes c4, I still believe this is a theory, but maybe it's not very necessary one for black to go, because after d takes c4, there is slight strategical advantage because of this pawn structure.
Which happened in the game, actually.
Yeah, it goes on the white side. But I don't know how deep he knew the theory, how deep he knew this line.
He taught like 40 minutes here.
All right, then perhaps he was out of the book. But I would never consider the placement of my pieces like he did in a game, because rook on c8 is useless.
Yeah.
I need to organize some play. Perhaps this play might be with having the bishop on h3. Maybe he wants to keep the rook on a8 and potentially rook on b8. Maybe he wants to play with h6, g5, maybe with bishop on f5. But in all these things I'm saying, even maybe rook e8 and e5, e4, bishop f5. Still, I take white. I would say strategically I like white more. But in all these lines which I mentioned, rook has not to be on c8. So I consider this like already misplaying. Bishop e6 and rook c8 just helping white, because I don't see the point. Rook has to be on d8 maybe, and knight has to go where c6 to d4. For instance, even here he would I don't know, just help me if it works or not. Maybe knight d4. Because I don't want to change the knight. I don't want to have this structure with having a4, a5 pressure. Yeah, maybe it's not working now, playing knight d4, bishop takes b7, rook b8. Now it's been bishop takes d4. Yeah, but it's interesting. Even c takes d4, knight c6.
Wow, what's going on here?
Queen c7, knight takes b8, and I was hoping to grab the bishop. But even here it's not over because of rook b1.
And big complications.
Yeah, I thought like queen a8, knight a6, bishop h3.
Where do I escape with the queen?
a8, I thought.
Woo!
Yeah, knight a6 and then to have bishop h3. Wow, but I'm too far. I think it's in white's favor, and I'm too far to trap the... to trap the knight on h6.
It's free now. It's free.
Yeah, the guy is free. But I'm not saying the correct lines at the moment, but just I don't feel for black to play this structure which he did.
Yeah.
Therefore, I would maybe recommend in this moment. This is the critical moment, and unfortunately, maybe the only critical moment in the game.
So you say he made a strategical poor decision here, and then he suffered all game.
Yeah, this is what I say. I think this is the critical thing. I would really admit queen c7, b6, bishop b7.
Then I have to hand it to Burak, because he taught 40 minutes here. He understood that it was the critical. Okay, maybe he made a slight mistake, but he understood this was the moment.
Yeah, but position is not easy, you know. Like queen c7, it's already knight c3 and knight b5. So maybe maybe there is some lines with queen d7 somewhere even.
Wow.
Like they play, but again, it's about knight e5 move here and there that the rook on a8 is hanging. But even in the game, as he played bishop takes e6, knight d2, but never rook c8, queen d7, rook a d8.
Yeah.
Some better placement for the rook. This is what I feel. Or even if you don't like knight e5 is coming, maybe you have to trade the bishop. Maybe you have to play knight e8 or knight e7. Again, I would not be surprised in case the theory would happen, and there is still the theory, but I don't know it. And from my feeling, I just should go on that.
Yeah.
And in the game, by
this type of positions are too difficult to analyze with computer, because computer will like all positions and evaluate most positions close to equal. So you need a human eye. But as far as I see, b6, a4, and white is pressing.
White has much better pawn structure, and it's very painful for black to suffer in this position. So yeah, we can squeeze through that. Burak tried to change some pieces, and he tried to keep the position, but unfortunately it's just tough to play. You know, it's like one-sided and without counterplay.
Very good game by Kıvanç. I think he played like in his old days.
Very nice played from the white side, and actually, like, all the moves are understandable, they're clean, and they're like all going forward. So congrats to white, and I'm pretty sure that for Burak it will be a better days in this tournament.
Yeah, he won the second round. We have this one. So we skip this game. We can say that white continued his squeeze play, and it was maybe just replay the moves.
Yeah, we just
in case somebody.
Now two weaknesses on a6 and on c5, and white are pressing on both.
He doesn't mind exchanging queens, obviously.
And just white played on both sides, and extra weakness on king's side, pawn on g6, very bad knight on g7.
I think somewhere, very nice. Wow,
really nice. Even little tactics come.
And even this is perfect, like double pawns just to control.
Very nice understanding of white. Even if it was like practical chance somewhere side, I don't think so, but it looks like very impressive.
Very impressive game, yes.
So it's something to be proud of.
Maybe this wins the brilliancy prize if the voters are all high understanding players, because positionally this game is very clean and
just very clean
very
game.
Impressive.
Very clean game. Yeah, maybe we go for next one.
Yes, and this now we have London system. You were very interested in this opening. So what do you want to tell?
About this. This is the theory. So we've seen it like hundreds of times. And
this is theory?
Yeah, it's still theory.
I don't know what this, okay.
Yeah, black doesn't fall in the trap, like it's hanging on h7 in the lines. I think I've seen that several times.
This is still theory, huh?
I think so. I'm not sure in the 5 move, and actually we have to call Gatakovsky to talk about this.
The expert on this
line. And I also would admit other St. Petersburg player Alexander Shimanov, he had some ideas
Shimanov here. Also.
Yeah. So I suppose somewhere here a novelty happened. Don't exactly remember. Maybe this, maybe not. But white, like, king is in the center.
Yes, only problem is this.
And white chose, actually I see this from many Turkish players. They try to stay on strategical side.
Yeah.
They prefer to play on the squares, good square, bad square, but they're missing some dynamical points. So again, strategically white is doing perfect.
Perfect, yes. Just exchange the dark square bishops and kill slowly.
Amazing. Yeah, they keep control over e5 square, they would grab on c6. But however, I think this position is still in white's favor.
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah, so we just need to guard the pawn on d4 somehow, avoid this trick knight takes d4, which might happen.
He cannot castle, that's the problem, because of the
knight
screw.
takes d4, yeah?
No, I mean this one. Take and castle is... it's impossible, right?
Because of the... Yeah. because of rook on f1, losing the exchange. But I would say, what is the problem? After bishop e5, bishop b5, queen d2, here just by hand.
Escape the bishop.
Exactly, by hand, just to keep the bishop, because black has control over light squares. King is very unsecure, and you need to attack the king. Pair of bishop is an advantage.
Yes.
So also white has like Dvoretsky style remarks, the extra piece for the weak square. There is a huge topic in Dvoretsky books, like knight on f3 and bishop on e5. They both pretend,
can use the square.
Yeah, they both pretend to have the same square, but it's impossible to have two pieces at the same time there. So just avoid the control. Play bishop e7.
Probably he didn't want to calculate all this mating threats. Like again,
but it's
I think
only one move, and
yes.
Also, you know, like bishop b4 is a mating time to time mating back.
Now I saw this. This looks horrible. Yeah. Now you defend somehow with one of the moves, and yes, true. I think it's all.
This is about the point. So rook c8 has not to be played. Even black has a normal position, a good compensation.
I think he thought like, okay, even if though I have a strategically bad structure and bishop, his king is the main problem, and I will attack him. This is, I think, what he claimed during the game.
Yeah, that's true. But how slow? You see, all the moves, position is closed now, and to attack the king, it has to be very fast play.
Yeah.
But he played slowly. Queen e7, rook f8, then doubling the rooks. It takes like 1, 2, 3. I have only f3, king f2, then training the rooks, and I'm already there.
Yeah. If you can do it, it's amazing.
Or f3, king f2, h4, h5. So white has also same 2 free moves.
Yes, either this or king side attack.
Yeah. So, and unfortunately, with dark squared bishops on board, it could have been much easier to have these a5 threats and c file threats, doubling on c file, entering on c2. I'm still talking about this position.
Yeah.
So in case of bishop e7, then doubling on c file and a5 threatening before white would react a3, and then bishop a4 having the c2 square. So some entering and re-entering, that would be very.
Let's try to guess what black might have feared. Did he fear like h4? I think probably it's the only logical explanation, because I think Emirhan he knew about this weakness, but he just must have rejected due to some scary looking move, I would say. Otherwise I have to think like he doesn't know, which he does. So the only question is what to do after such a move like h4. But is it dangerous, or how dangerous?
Depends on how dangerous it is, and I would say
normal move. Can we do?
Maybe it's too normal.
Maybe it's too normal.
No, I would admit that I did not check with engine, and perhaps I'll be lost now. But my inner feeling when I have the dynamical advantage because of the king safety on e1 is to sacrifice first. We have to check rook takes f3, g takes f3, and queen f8, having the double threat on f3 pawn and for bishop f4.
Okay,
for bishop b4. Sorry,
I need to make a move that protects both, which I cannot. Actually,
no, you have queen f4, yeah?
I can, but I'll let you give me check. Probably you do, and then you release the queen for f8 square, or what?
I can play bishop b4, king d1, and perhaps even queen e7. Or I'm not sure that there is not enough things in about the endgame. Queen takes f4, bishop f4, and rook f8.
Yeah, this is also
just
typical French style.
Yeah, I think white is doing fine there, but there is the first intention to check is the sacrifice for such type of the position.
Maybe white just barely manages to escape here, but I understand your point. Bishop e7 had to be,
but also
had to be the move.
After h4, sorry.
Yeah, h4.
After h4, we have to consider your move. Like rook c8, and now rook takes f3 and queen f8 looks very powerful. and also c2 square.
Let's try. Maybe this is a mistake already, but if you take, do I have intermediate?
If we have to check, maybe g takes h5.
Yes.
Rook h3, threatening rook g3, and maybe h4 simply.
Yes. I think he didn't want to, you know, bother with all these calculations, and he thought like the other position. I'm not saying to like make his argument correct, but I think that's like practical way. This is too complicated for a human to.
And I actually agree that knight takes h4, and the rook g3 is almost mate by the next round. So we have to be like, I don't like, to be honest, I don't like rook c8, but this is the critical point that he had to consider what's going on after h4. Let's think one second more. Maybe this is the queen f7, queen f5, queen e4.
You want to sacrifice again?
No, just queen f7 at once. With the point after h5 to play queen f5. If it's still... No, it's impossible. Yeah, h takes g6, queen e4 check, and at least you have queen e3. No, queen e3, bishop b4, king d1 you have.
Like this.
Very complicated.
Very complicated, yeah. He didn't want to delve into all this, I think, and he chose the practical way.
Yeah, but practically the problem that here, after bishop e7, black might be easily winning. Yeah. After bishop takes e5, black might be easily losing without basically huge hopes for the win. So this is just the critical moment, and we're like bishop e7. I would make by hand. Correct, yeah. I feel it's correct, and then I will see. Maybe I made. But
this is how grandmasters lose their games, guys.
Yeah,
their intuition is so strong they get beaten by the tactic. Sometimes it happens, yeah, true.
No, that's 100% true.
Even here, without analyzing the position, I said escape the bishop because it had to be the move, but maybe tactically it's not working. Maybe it does.
Yeah, but you see, this is like how bishop e7 again, h4. This is the intuition, and this is the psychology. Yeah. So I trust you a lot when you say h5, and maybe this is the mate, but after h5 there is g5 in like half of the positions. Yes, so yeah, true. So I can play let's say queen f7, and after h5 I can play g5.
By the way, I believe bishop e7 is stronger. I agree with you. I just wanted to analyze few moves. So
yeah, just let's say knight takes g5, queen f5, just for fun. f4, just guarding the knight.
Okay, what
bishop takes g5.
Bishop.
F takes g5 and queen f1.
Deliver some nice mate.
Yeah, something like this. So, but I just feel that bishop e7 is correct, and it definitely requires some time to understand and to explain why it's correct. But yeah, this.
And how did let's go? Let's go a little bit fast. And why did White didn't end up having a one endgame or better endgame, or did and there was a mistake because. Here he went for h4.
Yeah, this I don't like, because in this position, White has the long-term dynamical advantage. Strategical advantage.
You want to exchange which pieces?
I want to trade the rooks. And I want to leave queen and knight versus queen and bishop.
Yeah, you want to keep this for, okay.
Yeah, so, and I also want to control all the black's counterplay. The only counterplay I see here is the b4 square. So, either I'm playing a3.
Yeah.
For full control, or I immediately somewhere I will grab rook takes c7. Maybe I don't want to play rook c7 at once, because queen takes c7 and there is something happening on c file, but basically I don't believe in that.
Not, but black has the option to trade and which match up in the game.
Yeah, so h4, queen c2, king e3, and white is still better there. Yeah, but here there is some play. So I would simply like play h3 and then h4, h5 to provoking black to grab on c1 by themselves.
You meant a3 and then h4.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And okay, let's go fast forward in this game. And when I saw this position, I thought that black has enough counterplay to keep the game, because if you remove the rooks, then it's a question whether it's winning or not. Probably it is, because I will put the king here somehow, g5.
Yeah, but black controls the open C file.
Yeah, if I exchange the rooks, I said.
Yeah, I understand, but who wants to exchange the rooks?
Rook C1 is a correct strategical decision, and I don't think white has a winning advantage here anymore. I mean, maybe he didn't have it at all.
Exactly. So, but at the same point, I don't understand the white's play. Rook D1 looks like very scary move to me. Because black is not entering.
Yeah.
Black wants to play queen a4 and then perhaps rook c2, and then it's over. The thing I have to be ready for queen a4. Really? Queen a4, then rook c1. And
no time to collect a2, right? It will be too much.
So my bet is just to proceed with h5. I just continue.
Yeah, maybe that was white's chance in this game.
I just continue, I take as more space as possible, and in case black is not able to get to c2, then it's it's fine.
True. Maybe this was the missed chance, because the moment I saw this rook c1 move, which was of course correct, I said, okay, I mean, I imagine myself being black. I didn't think I would lose here with black, because he will just try, teasing, attacking all these pawns, and it's too difficult to get something now.
Yeah, I would say it's much easier to defend now than before. So that's 100%.
Okay, so we jump to the last game of the first round, and it is between Cem Kaan and Volkan Sevgi. Actually, this is a tragic game, a little drama in this game, because the result changed, sides towards the end. It was like black having a very, very good middle game position, almost winning, probably winning, and then some strange...
It just reminds us now the new Netflix TV series, Queen's Gambit, like what to say about Caro-Kann? It's only pawns and no hope,
Only pawns and no hope.
Yeah, it's not about this game actually, but white did not play in a principal manner like in last time they used for bishop d3 moves, not going for these structures, even one move before bishop d3, and there is such alliance, but we do not stop in the opening.
Okay,
that's for the first time I think I played this setup with white a long time ago in Russian Higher League versus Grandmaster Vladimir Burmakin back in 2004.
And how did it go?
So I won with white. For me it was like a huge achievement to beat a GM. I was only like 2400 in age of 15, and I still have a very good memories, and white is definitely playing for bishop g5, knight g3, then
targeting the h5 pawn.
And they will try to have the short castle, rook c1, rook d1, a4, a5. So I would say
so your strategy is short castle.
Yeah, I don't think white is basically ready for long castle.
And when this bishop is here,
but depends on
the piece.
Depends on the placement of black pieces.
And now there is no bishop g5. Did white miss any moment to play bishop g5 earlier, or?
I would say I would play bishop g5 at straight here.
And something like this, and now you want to trade immediately.
Yeah, and then knight g2, if I can.
Like this. I see.
So, but I don't think black is going for bishop e7, and there it has to be different theory. But now it goes very comfortable. Actually, till now it's very comfortable for white still, and it sounds like accepted Queen's Gambit.
Yes, it's
very similar positions, but with a very good bishop on g6 and
very unusual knight for Queen's Gambit, knight going to b6. I don't recall any variation where
knight b6, knight c6 usually the structure, and the pawn is on c7. So I think black is doing normally.
And what about this? Is something to criticize, or is normal way to treat the position? Because obviously he didn't want knight to jump on f5 and put pressure on these two guys.
Yeah, but what shall we say? Like in Russian saying, when you lose the head, too late to cry about the hair. So I would say bishop g5 is still the move. When
you lose the head, it's too late about the... Okay, nice translation work coming up for me. But I can do this. We have some similar sayings, but I will translate it as it is. And it's a success for black, this whole opening.
Yeah, I would say they have pair of bishops. White has a very strange bishop on b3, 2 knights for 1 square and no
black is leading on the
squares.
development. Black has lead on the development.
I think black is simply much better already.
So where was the mistake? Not
I
postponing
think
bishop g5.
Yeah, I think it has to be bishop g5 a couple of times. And White just made the obvious moves, but the bishop on b3 is misplaced.
No, you want to retreat?
No, I just want to mark the pieces.
Yeah. Okay, so this long castle position, okay, let's do like this.
Bishop is a bit misplaced. 2 knights for 1 square.
Again, superfluous knights we used to call.
Yeah, and pair of bishops for black, and also very weak light squares and full control of the center, and no extra pieces. Even having less space, black has already traded 1 pair of minor pieces, and there are no weaknesses in the camp.
Yeah, this is what Karakan players dream of. No weaknesses. Some passive play sometimes, but no weaknesses.
Yeah, and it's not about the pawns anymore.
Yes, it's not about the pawns anymore. So White is struggling to find a plan. This bishop on g6 is like a monster. And I think he got beaten by a tactical move somewhere around here. There was...
Yeah, I don't like a bit maybe black is playing imprecisely. Black has to prepare the f6 move. I want to open the position up. But maybe he was playing for c5. Maybe it's also not the worst case. But rook h e8 followed by f6 also looks very logical, because White has nothing to do in this position. Rook h e8 to guard on e6.
E8, sorry.
So and then but the potential f6. I don't think there is any single problem in the position for black. Yeah, rook c8 looks a bit arrogant to me, like too preparative. But now the very dynamical thing is happening.
And White really has no way to improve the position. So it seems that because no pawn pushes are possible. Nowhere.
White has to control the even this position. You say, oof, did not achieve anything.
Yeah,
it's time to stop the game. So and just trade everything possible. Knight g5, let's say. Bishop c2, king takes c2. Just it's hanging on f7, and perhaps black would take on g5, and there are no pieces left on board. And even if you're playing c5, I will just trade it. So trade it on c5.
Yeah, I must lose one move like this, I guess. No,
yeah, but this might even turn slightly worse for black, because I will keep the space advantage and knights on board. So knight e4, because if you compare d5 square to d6 square, d6 square is more important because it's more forward in opponent's camp.
But is it out of use at the moment? I mean, yeah, maybe you can do it right now, but it's only time to do it. So what you're saying is White just trying to exchange some active pieces of black might have better chances. So what happened? This b5 is a brave move, probably.
Yeah, well, black started some play. They have pair of bishops. They want to organize counterplay.
Pressure on d4, which will become crucial. And I think White missed a tactic here.
Yeah, White missed the tactic, but White simply missed the feeling of the position. They did not feel that they're so much worse, and then been slowly preparing for rook takes c2. They wanted to grab with the correct piece. They really wanted comfort, but it's too late for the comfort. So they had to trade the pieces and try to equalize.
And now very nice tactic by Volkan. He just won a pawn for nothing, basically, and black should be objectively winning, right?
Yeah, it's kind of very surprising to me. White
not
clearly,
just. Okay. So he didn't blunder it. He just thought that.
Yeah, he did not like the c5 move here. That everything is hanging, and
c5 here right away.
Yeah, he clearly did not like it. But anyway, it's better than to play with the pawn down. Maybe rook e to d2. Trying
good luck defending here, really.
Yeah, take on d4 and to take with the rook and to change one.
You have to take like this, so ugly, huh?
Yeah, but maybe potentially I will jump to d6. So the only way to defend in such a position is to change all the pieces.
Yeah. So he tried to get some counterplay by giving the pawn. Maybe it's a good practical decision, but here, as far as I remember my analysis, he played b4, which I think this finishes the game right away because it's too many threats. Too many threats at once. Now I don't know how to proceed with white. I mean, will I grab one of these two?
No, but with such a king safety, it's like bishop b4 attacking the
knight back. Yes.
And also queen d3 check and also controlling the file. So too many pieces.
When you take one of these, you will also give me a chance for queen d3. Yeah. Yes. So b4 is still must be good for. Sorry, I went too far ahead. Where were we?
But you actually went to the important points.
Really? Yes, true. But just to sake of the move order. And here during the game, I thought like, okay, white should resign in few moves. It's going to be end.
Yeah, like, but that's an extra proof. Never resign.
Yes.
Never give up.
Never give up. Appreciate white's correct way of defending. And as a chess player, it always amazes me this game. I mean, when you look at this position, I would say this game has like a life length of 5 moves maximum. 5 moves and then it's over. It feels like it, right? Don't you think? I mean, this rook can join the attack. The king is dead. Like, deadly pin. You cannot get out of the pin.
But at least it's equal pawns.
Is it? It is, yes. Yes, you have the right attitude.
Could be worse.
Yeah, we don't discuss what black might have missed, and we just come to... Or you found a winning line, or?
I did not check for a winning line.
Yeah, because if he checks, I think he blocks, and good timing, he protects this d1 square. Maybe it doesn't even make a difference.
Yeah, I would say I would never take the rook, the queen from d1. Yeah. I would honestly create the somewhere here. How could he win?
So it's black to move right now. This seemed like a correct way to go, and you don't like queen a4.
I'm thinking.
Okay, this queen a5 is a.
Yeah, but it's not easy already. So somewhere here, it had to be the chance to trade the rooks. Rook d8, rook c2, maybe queen c4, but some dominating moves, just to centralize all the pieces first, and then to come to this rook d5, rook c5. I don't care about the f7 pawn, basically.
No, I don't think he can.
Especially queen f7, rook b8, and then queen d3, because when you're playing such a position, you should feel your pieces together. That's like centralizing more. The queen is much better in the center than at any other place. So I want to feel my pieces together. Queen a4 is a little bit too far.
Yeah.
So I want to bring my pieces towards the feast, and then already to strike.
And here black felt he is obliged to trade the queens for king safety. Because he's got to protect this square, because now white might.
Yeah, and I think it's already turns. Of course, it's not worse for black. And
so you say it must be draw, right? White has enough resources for draw.
I would say it might even easily turn much worse for black. Real danger for black, because pawn on h4 is half of the queen.
Which happened in the game, but I don't see black losing this with correct play. I mean, so you say white, would you take white or black in this position? Let me ask you like this. Now we will understand which side is better, because when you comment like this, nothing is certain, but choose your side. Is black to move? You want to be which color?
No, I definitely take white.
Really? You take white? Okay.
Yeah, because I see that black has to be very precise.
Okay.
I mean, from the white side, I have rook d8 check, rook d7, and coming to g7. I can grab the pawn, and h pawn is already winning. So very close to be lost. And I would say with queens on board, it's possible to have like perpetual checks. But now everything is upside down.
I think many of us, including the players, they didn't realize how dangerous it could have been. Maybe GM Khan was aware of it, but I think Volkan was like happy, like pawn endgame, rook endgame.
King is on 8.
Yeah, this is
pieces are really far. Rook is coming via c5.
Yeah.
So rook is not coming even through c5 square.
Yes.
D file. Rook is coming to D7 to G7. King is actually closer to all the pawns, yes, and potential pass pawn on H4. I would say it's very shaky, and Black has to change a couple of pawns, and they should very fast entering the rook and play. Oof, tough.
So let's find Black's mistake. We approve this move.
Yeah, I think
F4
so.
F4 is a strong move, and now what? He played E5.
I think we think about G5 maybe.
G5 here right away, and now White must take.
F takes G5. F takes G5, H5,
yeah,
G4,
I
Rook H2,
yes,
Rook F7, H6, Rook H7, and I think it has to be drawish.
Yes, because you have this trump.
Yeah.
Yes. But this is very. I mean, you need a huge, like, I would say, either calculation skill or rook endgame experience to have your rook passive like this. This is nobody would do voluntarily, I tell you.
Yeah, that's true, but there is no choice.
There is no choice.
If you remember Sherlock Holmes, you know, there are two ways to define the right solution of the case. One is logical and one is unlogical. And when the logical is not working,
you must do unlogical. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So that there is no other way, because if I lose the G pawn and my king is still caught there on A8, like it's completely under control of the 7th rank, out of control on the 7th rank, and I'm playing without king as well.
This is lost. I don't believe it. I cannot believe this is lost. There's no way to save this.
Very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Pawn is hanging. G5, it would have been H5, H6, H7.
Exactly. Yeah. This now.
I just ran to H7 by.
It's all about this king's poor position. Wow, this was a shock, I think, for Black, because he never thought he would. I think during the game he thought like, okay, I'm pawn up. Worst can happen to me is not winning, but instead it turned out to be he was the one to be, you know, precise. But I mean, this is lost. Still, this is lost.
Very dangerous.
Very dangerous, yeah.
I mean, I never certain about rook end games. As Dr. Tarash said, all rook end games are drawish.
Drawish, yeah.
And you know, I also have wasted and lost and wasted many rook end games in my career. So before I calculate, like even by fingers, like many good gems, like counting the tempos by finger here and there. Yeah, even before that, I would never say.
Yeah. And now, yeah, this must be won easily.
Yeah, when rook stands behind the pawn, it's.
Can we try to save Black here? How? Check. You go up.
Yeah.
And now is time. But you have G4, right?
G4, you have F5 still.
Do I have? I do. Yes. Great. Otherwise, I would have been dead. So, okay, maybe this is a way to save. Why not? I will play F5, and now I have this guy. I don't think. I mean, my intuition tells me this should be drawn still.
So if H6,
F5 I must play,
F5
right?
You're running, and then I'm running by the king. This is what we have to count.
Oh, okay, this is okay. I go up now.
A5. Yeah, but you're fast enough.
I'm fast enough, right?
You're fast.
It feels like Black should be able to save it.
Looks like. So maybe, king C5,
yes.
A4, Rook G7, King A6, H7. This is the only chance. And
should I defend or push? I should push, I think. But you have a trap? No trap.
No, not yet. So if you play A3, I play King C6.
Now you have a trap.
You're playing. No. Just play A2. For now, it's not working. Because after Rook G8, then you have check.
This very discordant check.
After King C7, you grab the pawn with the check on H7, and then it's over.
And if you go up, I can go. Oh, what? I take and
or you take, or you play king to 7th rank. So you find
our final conclusion is that.
Yeah, 1 second for me at that position.
Yeah.
Before you start.
But this is the game, so I can. This was the game. So now I'm suggesting the game continuation was A5. I'm suggesting putting the rook where it should belong. Yeah, where it should belong. So okay, now it's up to you. If G4 F5 saves black, then you have only one move, I guess, because if you put the rook passive way, I put king on c5, no way you can. Maybe I cannot put king on c5.
If I'm playing g4, that's the other try.
Yes.
f5, g takes f5, rook h5, and then perhaps f6.
Okay, I again do this, right?
You can wait for one move, but you can play that. King d4, and then you run with the king. Maybe pawn, King e4, rook f1, king e5. So there is some practical chances for white.
Yes, exactly.
But I suppose maybe you're like playing king b6. You have to activate the king as fast as possible.
Now this, it's getting ugly.
Yeah, but you know it's still it's Carcon and there is
always true.
No, it's about the pawns now and not.
I hope my queen is not getting screwed.
You are in time, yeah?
I am in time, but do I get
no,
study like loss?
c5 square, no.
c5 square, lucky c5 square, and I'm not getting screwed.
Yeah, you're playing for win.
Yeah, I'm playing for a win.
You're playing for win.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, you are entirely right. If there is a chance to get the pawn behind, rook behind the pawn, then it's perfect.
Okay, thank you, Evgeny. I think it's been a great analysis, very enlightening for our viewers how a grandmaster approaches the position. Some things you said are, I think, extremely enlightening and educational about this dynamic feeling for the position when you are looking for a certain type of moves, the way you should approach the position. If the players have time to watch, maybe you will even affect the tournament.
And to check our evaluations, I think for the spectators, it's very interesting to see what the engine says, because we did not use the engine, obviously.
Yeah. Some games I just briefly looked, but during this analysis, no.
Yeah, I did not use it all. Yes, and therefore I say sorry, of course, for my mistakes, but at the same time, this is how I feel and what you can actually learn from studying chess without the machine.
Yes,
it's very important, the human's feeling.
And in our age group, at our times, computers were still not that strong. So I mean, our teachers were using hands to analyze, and this is how we got taught. And you are from that school of thought also, so it shows how important to just analyze by hand or by mouse for 21st century.
My first computer, Windows 98, I got 17 years ago, or actually 18 already, for winning European Championship under 12.
Under 12,
I won it. I got it in 2001.
There were any programs installed inside, or you had to buy? You use Chess Assistant or Chess?
Yeah, for the beginning, it was Chess Assistant.
All Russians
I even
had
no idea that ChessBase existed. Even not sure if it was existed back in 2000.
I don't know. Me too.
But even until the, let's say, 2007, 8, something like this. For me, for my generation, it was almost no engines. So only afterwards we started to use that. And it's just different chess, and this is what you can learn from the fingers, finger feeling, as we usually say, of the alive grandmaster. So thanks for inviting.
Yes, it's been a great pleasure. I hope to do more. I mean, maybe not for this tournament, but surely our roads will cross with you, maybe in Turkish league, maybe in international scene, me as a journalist, you as a trainer or a player. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much. And we will continue to follow the tournaments. Now I will say some things in Turkish as a closure, and we go out to dinner. Together.
Thank you, and good luck to the players, and good luck to all the spectators. Thanks for inviting.
Arkadaşlar çok teşekkürler. Çok uzun, güzel bir yayın oldu. Büyükusta Evgeny Romanov, milli takım antrenörümüz bizlerle birlikteydi. Türkiye Şampiyonası'nı analiz etmeye devam edeceğim. Kuvvetli oyuncularla fırsat buldukça kanalda belki böylelikle biraz hareketlendirmiş olurum. Hepinize çok teşekkür ediyorum izlediğiniz için. Sağlıcakla kalın, satrançla kalın. İyi akşamlar.